Marcus Kane was not the kind of man who stood out in a crowd. Standing at an average height with a lean build, his quiet demeanor and unassuming presence made him blend into any environment without drawing attention. He had warm brown eyes that often carried a distant look, as if he were lost in thoughts too heavy to share. For the past 2 years, Marcus had been serving time in Red Rock Penitentiary, a maximum security prison notorious for its violence and corruption. Wrongfully convicted of armed robbery after being framed by corrupt police officers, Marcus had accepted his fate with stoic resignation. He didn't fight back when they threw him behind bars. Instead, he focused on surviving each day while keeping his head down. Inside the cold, gray walls of the penitentiary, life moved at a brutal pace. The air was thick with tension, and danger lurked around every corner. Gangs ruled different sections of the facility, enforcing their own twisted laws through intimidation and violence. Most inmates quickly aligned themselves with one faction or another, seeking protection or power. But Marcus was different. He avoided alliances, choosing instead to stay isolated. His days were spent reading books borrowed from the sparse library, writing letters for illiterate inmates, and occasionally offering advice to those struggling to cope with prison life. While some respected his calm nature, others viewed him with suspicion, wondering why someone so seemingly ordinary never seemed afraid. Despite the hostility surrounding him, Marcus maintained a routine. Every morning he woke up before sunrise, performed a series of stretches and exercises in the privacy of his cell, and then joined the queue for breakfast. Afterward, he would spend hours in the library, losing himself in novels about faraway places and worlds vastly different from the grim reality of prison. These stories became his escape, a way to forget, even briefly, the injustice that had landed him there. On weekends, he volunteered to help fellow inmates write letters to their families, carefully crafting words that conveyed love, regret, or hope, depending on what the sender needed most. It was during these moments that Marcus felt most alive, finding purpose in small acts of kindness amidst chaos. But not everyone appreciated his quiet ways. To some, Marcus's refusal to join gangs or participate in conflicts came across as arrogance rather than self-preservation. They saw him as weak, someone easy to prey upon. Among them was a group known as the Iron Fangs, one of the most feared gangs in the prison. Led by Razor, a hulking figure with scars crisscrossing his face and arms, the gang thrived on instilling fear. Razor prided himself on maintaining control over the other inmates, ensuring no one dared challenge his authority. When he noticed Marcus walking alone in the yard, oblivious to the glares directed his way, something inside him snapped. "Who does this guy think he is?" Razor muttered under his breath, narrowing his eyes. Razor wasn't used to being ignored, especially by newcomers. In his mind, Marcus's silence equated to disrespect. Determined to teach him a lesson, Razor began plotting an ambush. He gathered 4 of his toughest enforcers and instructed them to corner Marcus after dinner when the hallways were less crowded. "Make sure it looks like an accident," Razor growled, his voice low but menacing. "We don't need trouble with the guards." With plans set in motion, the gang waited patiently, their anticipation building as they imagined the satisfaction of breaking Marcus's spirit. That evening, Marcus walked back to his cell block, unaware of the storm brewing ahead. He carried a book tucked under his arm, his thoughts drifting to the story he had just started reading, a tale of courage and redemption. As he turned a corner, he suddenly found himself surrounded by 5 men blocking his path. Razor stepped forward, cracking his knuckles loudly. "You've got a problem, newbie," he sneered, his tone dripping with malice. Marcus froze, his heart pounding as he realized what was happening. Before he could respond, one of the gang members shoved him against the wall, causing the book to slip from his grasp and fall to the floor. The sound echoed eerily in the narrow corridor, drawing curious glances from nearby inmates who stopped to watch. For a moment, Marcus considered trying to reason with them. Maybe if he explained that he meant no harm, they'd let him go. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about dominance. Razor wanted to prove a point, and Marcus happened to be the unfortunate target. As the first punch flew toward his face, instinct took over. Years of suppressing his true identity had dulled his reflexes, but something primal stirred within him now. Without thinking, Marcus ducked, grabbed the wrist of his attacker, and twisted it sharply. The man cried out in pain, dropping to his knees. Another lunged at him, swinging wildly, but Marcus sidestepped effortlessly, using the momentum to throw him off balance. Within seconds, the tide of the confrontation shifted dramatically. The other inmates watched in stunned silence as Marcus moved with precision and speed that defied logic. One by one, the gang members fell, unable to keep up with his calculated strikes. Razor, realizing things weren't going according to plan, tried to intervene personally, but even his brute strength was no match for Marcus's skill. A swift kick to the knee sent Razor sprawling to the ground, clutching his leg in agony. By the time the guards arrived, alerted by the commotion, all 5 attackers were lying unconscious, groaning in pain. Marcus stood amidst the chaos, breathing heavily, but otherwise unharmed. His expression remained unreadable, though faint traces of confusion flickered in his eyes, as if he himself couldn't believe what had just happened. Word of the incident spread like wildfire through the prison. Inmates whispered among themselves, speculating about how a seemingly ordinary man could take down some of the toughest members of the Iron Fangs single-handedly. Some admired Marcus's bravery, seeing him as a potential ally against the oppressive gang rule. Others warned that Razor wouldn't take the humiliation lightly and would surely seek revenge. For Marcus, however, the victory brought more questions than answers. Memories he had buried long ago began surfacing. Memories of grueling training sessions, covert missions in hostile territories, and the weight of leadership that came with commanding elite soldiers. These flashes reminded him of who he truly was. Commander Marcus Kane, once one of the most decorated Delta Force operatives in U.S. history. Yet despite the clarity these memories provided, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Unbeknownst to him, this was only the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront not only his enemies, but also the secrets he had worked so hard to leave behind. The aftermath of the fight left the prison buzzing with rumors and speculation. Inmates who had witnessed Marcus's unbelievable display of skill couldn't stop talking about it. Some described him as a one-man army, while others whispered that he must have been hiding his true identity all along. The story spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of Red Rock Penitentiary. Even the guards, usually indifferent to inmate squabbles, found themselves intrigued by what had happened. For days, Marcus became the center of attention, a role he neither sought nor enjoyed. Despite the newfound notoriety, Marcus tried to return to his routine. He picked up where he had left off, reading books in the library and helping inmates write letters. But things were different now. The once silent corridors seemed louder, filled with murmurs whenever he passed by. Some prisoners nodded at him, respectfully, acknowledging his bravery. Others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly intimidated. Razor and his gang, however, remained eerily absent. No one knew where they had gone or what they were planning, but their silence only added to the tension simmering beneath the surface. For Marcus, the real challenge wasn't dealing with the attention. It was grappling with the memories that had resurfaced during the fight. Images from his past haunted him. Dusty battlegrounds under scorching suns, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing in the distance, and the faces of men he had trained alongside, men who were now either dead or scattered across the globe. These flashes weren't random. They were pieces of a life Marcus had deliberately buried. After leaving the military, he had chosen to live quietly, hoping to escape the violence and chaos that had defined his career. Yet here he was, trapped in a place where survival depended on skills he thought he'd left behind. As the days passed, Marcus began noticing subtle changes in how people interacted with him. A few inmates approached him cautiously, asking for advice or protection. One of them, a wiry young man named Jamal, confided that he was being extorted by another gang. "They say if I don't pay up, they'll hurt my mom outside," Jamal admitted, his voice trembling. Marcus listened intently, his jaw tightening. He wanted to help, but intervening would only draw more attention to himself and possibly put Jamal in greater danger. Still, he couldn't ignore the plea. That night, Marcus devised a plan, Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into the gang's territory and sabotaged their stash of contraband cigarettes, which they used as currency within the prison. Without evidence to prove Marcus's involvement, the gang backed off, leaving Jamal alone. Word of this act of quiet rebellion spread quickly, earning Marcus even more admirers, but also making him more enemies. Meanwhile, Razor seethed with rage. Humiliated and stripped of his authority, he retreated to the shadows, plotting his next move. Losing to Marcus in front of so many witnesses was bad enough, but seeing other inmates look up to him was unbearable. Razor knew he couldn't let this stand. If he didn't retaliate soon, his reputation and his grip on power would crumble completely. Determined to reclaim his dominance, Razor called a secret meeting with his most trusted enforcers. They gathered in a dimly lit corner of the recreation yard, speaking in hushed tones. "We need to make an example out of him," Razor growled, his voice dripping with venom. "But we do it smart. No mistakes this time." The plan they devised was simple yet ruthless. Razor decided to lure Marcus into a trap using deception. Through intermediaries, he sent a message claiming he wanted to negotiate peace. "Tell him I'm willing to talk," Razor instructed one of his men. "Say I respect what he did and want to settle things without bloodshed." The messenger delivered the message to Marcus later that day, finding him in the library surrounded by stacks of books. Marcus listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When the messenger finished, Marcus simply nodded and agreed to meet Razor in the laundry room late at night. Though outwardly calm, his mind raced with questions. Was this truly an olive branch, or was something darker lurking beneath the surface? That evening, as the prison settled into its usual nighttime rhythm, Marcus made his way to the designated meeting spot. The laundry room was located in a remote part of the facility, rarely used except for special tasks. As he approached, Marcus felt a prickle of unease. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he pushed forward, determined to face whatever awaited him. When he entered the room, the air was thick with anticipation. The lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. For a moment, everything seemed quiet, too quiet. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into darkness. Before Marcus could react, the sound of footsteps echoed around him, dozens of them. From the shadows emerged members of the Iron Fangs, armed with makeshift weapons, pipes, shivs, and chains glinting ominously in the dim light. Razor stepped forward, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "You should have stayed down," he snarled, raising a metal pipe above his head. Behind him, reinforcements poured in, surrounding Marcus on all sides. Outnumbered and cornered, Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. The moment he had feared and anticipated since arriving at Red Rock. There was no turning back now. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Despite the overwhelming odds, Marcus moved with a fluidity and precision that left his attackers reeling. Years of Delta Force training kicked in, transforming him into a force of nature. He dodged blows, countered strikes, and used the environment to his advantage, flipping tables and hurling laundry carts to create barriers. Each movement was calculated, each strike aimed to incapacitate rather than kill. Within minutes, the laundry room descended into chaos. Gang members fell one by one, groaning in pain as Marcus systematically dismantled their ranks. Even Razor, who charged at him with brute force, was no match for Marcus's skill. With a swift kick to the chest, Marcus sent Razor crashing into a pile of dirty uniforms, rendering him unconscious. When the dust finally settled, Marcus stood alone amidst the wreckage. Breathing heavily, he surveyed the scene, taking stock of the damage. Every member of the Iron Fangs lay defeated, their weapons scattered across the floor. For a moment, silence reigned. Then distant shouts broke the stillness as guards rushed toward the commotion. Realizing he had little time to spare, Marcus quickly searched for an exit. Spotting a ventilation shaft near the ceiling, he climbed onto a stack of crates and pulled himself through the narrow opening. Crawling through the ducts, he emerged in a secluded part of the prison just as the guards arrived at the laundry room. News of the second confrontation spread even faster than The first. Inmates whispered in awe, calling Marcus a legend. Guards exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to handle a prisoner who seemed untouchable. Razor, humiliated and injured, retreated further into obscurity, his influence shattered. But for Marcus, the victory brought no sense of triumph. Instead, it forced him to confront a truth he had long denied. His past was catching up with him, whether he liked it or not. The skills he had honed in the military, the very ones that had kept him alive, were now impossible to hide, and as much as he wished to remain invisible, he realized that staying silent might cost him more than his freedom. It might cost him his humanity. Over the next few days, Marcus wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to acknowledge the person he used to be. Memories of his Delta Force days flooded back, vivid and unrelenting. He remembered the camaraderie of his teammates, the adrenaline rush of high-stakes missions, and the sacrifices he had made for his country. These recollections filled him with pride, but also sorrow. He had walked away from that life because he believed it was over, that he could start anew. Yet here he was, fighting battles in a place where honor meant nothing and survival came at a steep price. On the other hand, Marcus grappled with guilt. He hated the idea of becoming a symbol of violence, even if it was necessary to protect himself and others. The last thing he wanted was to perpetuate the cycle of brutality that defined life in prison. But how could he resist when the system itself was broken? The corruption that had landed him there, the lies, the bribes, the sheer disregard for justice, wasn't limited to Red Rock. It stretched far beyond these walls, infecting every level of society. Marcus knew he couldn't fix everything, but maybe, just maybe, he could expose the truth. Maybe he could use his skills not just to survive, but to fight back against the forces that had wronged him. By the end of the week, Marcus had made a decision. He wouldn't let fear dictate his actions anymore. Whether it meant facing Razor, again, challenging the corrupt officials who had framed him, or risking everything to clear his name, he vowed to take control of his destiny. Little did he know, his resolve would soon attract the attention of someone unexpected, an outsider who saw potential in him and believed his story deserved to be told. Unbeknownst to Marcus, this encounter would set him on a path toward redemption, forcing him to embrace both his past and his future in ways he never imagined. The days following the laundry room ambush marked a turning point for Marcus. While he had managed to survive Razor's trap and dismantle the Iron Fangs, the victory came at a cost. The entire prison now knew there was something extraordinary about him, something dangerous. Guards began watching him more closely, their eyes lingering on him during inspections. Even the warden seemed uneasy, as if unsure how to handle a prisoner who defied every expectation. Marcus tried to maintain his routine, keeping his head down and avoiding unnecessary attention. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and some inmates treated him with a mixture of fear and admiration that bordered on reverence. Despite the growing tension, Marcus couldn't ignore the shift in dynamics within the prison. Without Razor's leadership, the Iron Fangs crumbled into disarray. Smaller gangs scrambled to fill the power vacuum, leading to sporadic clashes in the yard and hallways. For many inmates, Marcus had become a symbol of resistance, a man who stood up to tyranny and won. Yet this newfound status brought its own challenges. Several prisoners approached him, asking for protection or guidance. Some even suggested forming a new alliance under his leadership. Marcus politely declined each request, knowing that involving himself further would only escalate the violence. Still, he couldn't turn a blind eye when injustice struck those who were truly vulnerable. One such case involved a young inmate named Derek, whose frail frame and timid demeanor made him an easy target for predators. Derek had been caught stealing food from the kitchen after missing meals due to illness, and the kitchen staff retaliated by threatening to report him for misconduct. If convicted, Derek faced months in solitary confinement, a punishment far harsher than the offense warranted. Desperate, he sought out Marcus, hoping for help. "I don't know what to do," Derek admitted, tears streaming down his face. They're going to ruin me. Marcus listened intently, his jaw tightening with anger. He understood all too well how the system worked, how it preyed on the weak and exploited their mistakes. Determined to intervene, Marcus devised a plan. That night, he infiltrated the kitchen during lockdown hours, using his knowledge of the prison layout to avoid detection. Once inside, he planted evidence implicating one of the abusive guards in theft. By morning, the guard was arrested, and the charges against Derek were dropped. Though no one could prove Marcus's involvement, rumors circulated that he had, once again, stepped in to protect someone powerless. His reputation grew, but so did the risks. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his actions hadn't gone unnoticed outside the prison walls. A journalist named Elena Rodriguez had been investigating corruption within the justice system for years. Her work often focused on exposing wrongful convictions, and she had recently come across Marcus's case file while researching patterns of misconduct among law enforcement agencies. At first glance, the details seemed suspicious. Key witnesses, recanting statements, missing evidence, and questionable testimonies from officers involved in the investigation. Intrigued, Elena dug deeper, uncovering connections between Marcus's arrest and a larger network of bribery and coercion orchestrated by high-ranking officials. Elena's curiosity deepened when she heard stories about the mysterious inmate, known as Marcus Kane. Reports of his confrontations with the Iron Fangs piqued her interest, especially given the descriptions of his combat skills. "This guy doesn't act like your average convict," one source told her. "There's something military about him, like he's trained for situations like this." These accounts convinced Elena to visit Red Rock Penitentiary herself. Under the guise of writing an article about life behind bars, she requested permission to interview several inmates, including Marcus. When Elena finally met Marcus in the visiting room, she found him sitting quietly at a table, his hands clasped together. Up close, she noticed the faint scars on his knuckles and the sharp intelligence in his eyes. She introduced herself and explained her reason for being there, careful not to reveal too much of her agenda. Marcus listened patiently, his expression guarded. When she asked about his experiences in prison, he responded with vague answers, clearly reluctant to share personal details. Elena pressed on, steering the conversation toward broader topics like systemic corruption and wrongful imprisonment. Slowly, Marcus began opening up, though he remained cautious. Over the course of several visits, Elena earned Marcus's trust. She shared snippets of her research, revealing discrepancies in his trial records and pointing out inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus saw tangible proof that he wasn't alone, that there were people willing to fight for justice. Yet he hesitated to fully cooperate. Exposing the truth meant unraveling secrets he had spent years burying, not just about his wrongful conviction, but also about his past as a Delta Force commander. He feared the consequences, not only for himself, but for those he cared about. Elena sensed his reluctance and decided to take a different approach. During one of their meetings, she brought along a folder containing documents she had uncovered. Inside were photographs of the corrupt officers who had framed Marcus, along with transcripts of conversations linking them to illegal activities. "You didn't deserve this," Elena said firmly, sliding the folder across the table. "But you can't let them win. If you want to clear your name, I can help, but you need to trust me." Marcus stared at the folder, his mind racing. He thought about the sacrifices he had made to leave his old life behind, the promises he had made to never return to that world. But he also thought about the innocent lives destroyed by the same system that had wrongfully imprisoned him. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. Finally, he looked up at Elena, his eyes filled with determination. "What do you need from me?" he asked. From that moment on, Marcus and Elena formed an unlikely partnership. Together they began piecing together the puzzle of his wrongful conviction, connecting the dots between bribed witnesses, falsified evidence, and shadowy figures pulling strings from behind the scenes. Elena used her resources to dig deeper, while Marcus relied on his instincts and experience to anticipate potential threats. Their collaboration extended beyond mere investigation. It became a mission to expose the rot infecting the justice system. As weeks turned into months, their efforts yielded results. They identified key players in the conspiracy, including a powerful district attorney who had orchestrated Marcus's arrest to cover up his own involvement in organized crime. With each new discovery, Marcus felt a mix of influential stakeholders. Among them was an ex-Delta Force teammate named Captain Ryan Hayes, who recognized Marcus despite his changed appearance. Ryan had retired from active duty years ago, but still maintained contacts within government agencies. When Elena reached out to him, explaining the situation, Ryan agreed to meet Marcus in secret. Their reunion took place in a secluded corner of the prison yard where Ryan handed Marcus a small device disguised as a pen. "It's a recording tool," Ryan explained. "Use it wisely. We can't afford any slip-ups." Marcus nodded, grateful for the support. With Ryan's assistance, they devised a plan to gather irrefutable evidence against the conspirators. Marcus would use his position inside the prison to monitor communications and intercept crucial information, which Ryan and Elena would analyze outside. The operation moved forward cautiously, with Marcus navigating the treacherous waters of prison politics while feeding intel to his allies. Each step brought them closer to dismantling the web of corruption, but it also heightened the stakes. Marcus knew that failure wasn't an option, not when so much was on the line. As he prepared for the final phase of their plan, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had been long and painful, filled with sacrifices and hard choices. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Justice might still be possible, not just for him, but for everyone. Trapped in a broken system, and with Elena and Ryan by his side, he was ready to fight for it no matter the cost. With the pieces of the conspiracy slowly falling into place, Marcus found himself walking a tightrope between danger and determination. Armed with the recording device provided by Captain Ryan Hayes, he began infiltrating deeper layers of the prison's underground network. This was no ordinary task. It required precision, patience, and nerves of steel, qualities that came naturally to someone like Marcus. Every conversation he overheard, every whispered deal struck in shadowy corners became a potential clue. He listened carefully, filtering out meaningless chatter to focus on exchanges involving corrupt guards, inmate enforcers, and even officials, visiting the facility under the guise of inspections. The first breakthrough came when Marcus intercepted a conversation between two senior guards during a late-night patrol. They spoke casually about an upcoming shipment scheduled to arrive at the prison, a code word for illegal contraband smuggled in by organized crime syndicates. The shipment wasn't just drugs or weapons. It included sensitive documents tied to the very conspiracy that had landed Marcus behind bars. One of the guards mentioned a name, Victor Langston, the district attorney who had orchestrated Marcus's wrongful conviction. Hearing this confirmed what Elena and Ryan had suspected all along, that Langston was deeply entangled in criminal enterprises, using his position to shield himself and his associates from scrutiny. Marcus wasted no time. Using the pen-like recording device, he captured fragments of their discussion, ensuring he stayed hidden in the shadows. Once they moved on, he quickly relayed the information to Elena through coded letters smuggled out by trusted inmates. Elena, working tirelessly outside the prison walls, cross-referenced the details with her existing research. She discovered that Langston had been funneling bribes through shell companies linked to the same officers involved in framing Marcus. The evidence was damning, but it still wasn't enough to bring him down completely. They needed something concrete, something undeniable. Meanwhile, tensions inside the prison continued to rise. Word had spread among the remaining factions that Marcus was gathering intelligence, though no one knew exactly why or for whom. Some viewed him as a threat, while others saw an opportunity to align themselves with someone capable of taking down powerful enemies. Razor, still nursing his wounds and simmering with resentment, sensed weakness in the chaos. Though his gang had been dismantled, he wasn't ready to give up. Instead, he reached out to remnants of rival gangs, proposing a temporary alliance aimed at eliminating Marcus once and for all. Razor's plan was deceptively simple yet effective. Knowing Marcus couldn't be taken down through brute force alone, he decided to exploit the growing paranoia within the prison. By spreading rumors that Marcus was secretly collaborating with the warden to gain early release, Razor hoped to turn other inmates against him. It worked faster than expected. Accusations flew like wildfire, fueled by fear and mistrust. Inmates who had once looked up to Marcus now eyed him suspiciously, questioning his motives. Even those he had helped in the past began distancing themselves, unwilling to risk association with a man accused of betrayal. Isolated and increasingly targeted, Marcus realized he couldn't rely solely on stealth and strategy anymore. He needed allies, people he could trust implicitly. Reaching out to Jamal and Derek, the two inmates he had previously protected, he explained the situation without revealing too much. Both men agreed to assist him, driven by gratitude and a shared desire to see justice served. Together, they formed a small but loyal team dedicated to supporting Marcus's mission. Jamal, resourceful and street-smart, kept tabs on inmate movements and gathered gossip from the yard. Derek, whose frailty masked a sharp mind, monitored kitchen staff and intercepted messages passed through food trays. Their contributions proved invaluable, allowing Marcus to stay one step ahead of his enemies. As the days passed, Marcus grew bolder. With Elena and Ryan coordinating efforts externally, he focused on gathering more evidence. His next target was a mid-level gang leader named Tank, who served as a courier for Langston's operation. Tank frequently carried encrypted notes detailing transactions and meeting locations, making him a critical link in the chain. To get close to Tank, Marcus staged a minor altercation in the recreation yard, deliberately provoking him into a confrontation. When the fight escalated, Marcus allowed Tank to gain the upper hand initially, lulling him into a false sense of security. Then, seizing the moment, Marcus disarmed Tank and pinned him to the ground. While pretending to negotiate peace, Marcus slipped the recording device into Tank's pocket unnoticed. Later that night, Tank unknowingly recorded a phone call with one of Langston's associates, confirming the existence of a secret meeting set to take place in a secluded warehouse outside the city. The location was significant. It matched addresses Elena had flagged in her investigation as hubs for illegal activity. With this new lead, Marcus transmitted the information to Ryan, who arranged surveillance teams to monitor the area discreetly. For the first time, they were closing in on Langston himself, but Langston wasn't oblivious to the danger looming over him. A meticulous planner, he had built safeguards into his operations, including informants within the prison tasked with reporting any suspicious behavior. One such informant, a low-ranking guard named Briggs, noticed Marcus's frequent visits to isolated parts of the facility and reported it to Langston's intermediaries. Suspicion turned into certainty when Briggs overheard inmates discussing Marcus's alleged collaboration with external forces. Realizing Marcus posed a direct threat, Langston issued orders to neutralize him permanently. The order reached Razor via a corrupt lieutenant, instructing him to eliminate Marcus before he could expose anything further. Emboldened by the directive and eager to restore his shattered reputation, Razor devised a final ambush. He chose the maintenance tunnels beneath the prison, a labyrinthine network rarely accessed except for repairs. Luring Marcus there would be easy. Convincing him to investigate a supposed leak in the plumbing system required minimal effort. What Razor didn't anticipate, however, was Marcus's heightened awareness. Having spent years honing his instincts, Marcus immediately recognized the setup. Still, he couldn't afford to ignore it. If there truly was a leak, it could flood sections of the prison, endangering countless lives. And if it was a trap, avoiding, it might tip off his adversaries prematurely. Descending into the dimly lit tunnels, Marcus moved cautiously, his senses attuned to every sound and movement. The air was damp and musty, carrying echoes of dripping water and distant footsteps. As he rounded a corner, he spotted several figures waiting in ambush. Razor and his makeshift army of ex-gang members armed with makeshift weapons. Before they could strike, Marcus acted decisively. He triggered a nearby valve, releasing a torrent of water that flooded the narrow passageway. Caught off guard, many of the attackers slipped and fell, giving Marcus the opening he needed to counterattack. Moving with lethal efficiency, he incapacitated them one by one, leaving only Razor standing. Breathing heavily, Marcus confronted Razor, who clutched a rusted pipe in trembling hands. "You think you're untouchable?" Razor spat, rage distorting his face. Marcus stared back, calm and resolute. "I'm not trying to be," he replied evenly, "but I won't let you hurt anyone else." With a swift motion, Marcus disarmed Razor and knocked him unconscious, ending the battle decisively. Back above ground, Marcus emerged soaked, but victorious. News of his triumph spread rapidly, silencing doubts and rekindling admiration among the inmates. Yet Marcus knew the real fight lay ahead. Outside the prison walls, Elena and Ryan were preparing for the final phase of their operation. Surveillance teams had identified Langston entering the warehouse, accompanied by several armed mercenaries. It was clear he intended to destroy incriminating evidence stored there, erasing any trace of his crimes. Marcus, determined to stop him, requested a transfer to solitary confinement, a move designed to create a diversion and buy time for his allies to act. In the dead of night, Elena and Ryan led a covert raid on the warehouse, capturing Langston and his accomplices red-handed. Boxes of documents, digital files, and illicit goods were seized as proof of their wrongdoing. Simultaneously, Marcus used his isolation to record a detailed confession implicating Langston and his network, ensuring there would be no room for denial. When dawn broke, the authorities descended upon Red Rock Penitentiary, arresting corrupt guards and confiscating evidence linking them to Langston's operation. For Marcus, the culmination of months of effort brought both relief and resolve. Justice had been served, but the scars of his ordeal remained. He understood now that his skills weren't meant to fade into obscurity. They were tools to protect the vulnerable and challenge injustice. With Elena and Ryan by his side, Marcus stepped forward into a new chapter, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The aftermath of the warehouse raid sent shockwaves through Red Rock Penitentiary and beyond. Victor Langston, once a towering figure in the justice system, was now behind bars himself, his reputation shattered by the overwhelming evidence against him. News outlets buzzed with headlines about the scandal, exposing the intricate web of corruption that had festered for years. For Marcus Kane, the victory was bittersweet. His wrongful conviction had been overturned, and he was finally declared innocent by a court order. Yet as he walked out of the prison gates for the first time in 2 years, he felt no sense of triumph, only a deep exhaustion mingled with resolve. Elena Rodriguez stood waiting for him outside, her face lighting up with relief when she saw him emerge into the sunlight. She held out a small duffel bag containing fresh clothes and essentials, knowing Marcus would need them after so long in confinement. "You're free," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained somber. Freedom wasn't something he could fully embrace yet. Too much damage had been done, both to him and to countless others caught in the same broken system. Instead of celebrating, he asked Elena about the next steps. "What happens now?" he said, his tone steady, but laced with urgency. "Now," Elena explained, they focused on dismantling the larger network that Langston had been part of. While Langston's arrest dealt a significant blow, it was clear he wasn't the sole architect of the corruption. Other officials, law enforcement officers, and criminals were still operating under the radar, exploiting loopholes and silencing anyone who dared speak out. Ryan Hayes joined them shortly after, bringing updates from his contacts within government agencies. Together, the trio mapped out a plan to continue their fight, not just for Marcus, but for all those wrongfully imprisoned or victimized by systemic injustice. Their first priority was to secure Marcus's safety. Though Langston was incarcerated, his allies remained active, many of whom viewed Marcus as a dangerous loose end. To protect him, Ryan arranged for temporary relocation to a safe house in an undisclosed location. The move was necessary, but Marcus struggled with the idea of hiding, while others continued to suffer. He voiced his concerns during one of their strategy meetings at the safe house. "I didn't go through all this just to sit back and do nothing," he insisted, his frustration evident. "If I can help expose more of these criminals, then I have to try." Ryan understood Marcus's determination but emphasized caution. "Your skills are valuable, but you're not invincible," he reminded him. "We need to play this smart. You've already risked your life enough." Despite Ryan's warnings, Marcus refused to stand idly by. With Elena's guidance, he began reviewing case files of other inmates who might have been wrongfully convicted due to similar conspiracies. Each file represented a life stolen, a family torn apart, and a truth buried beneath layers of deceit. As Marcus sifted through the documents, memories of his own ordeal surfaced, fueling his resolve to make a difference. One particular case caught his attention: a young woman named Maria Alvarez, serving 20 years for a murder she claimed she didn't commit. Her story bore eerie similarities to Marcus's: coerced confessions, missing evidence, and conflicting testimonies from police officers involved in the investigation. Elena confirmed that Maria's case had been flagged during her earlier research, but hadn't received much attention due to lack of resources. Seeing an opportunity to act, Marcus suggested reaching out to Maria directly. However, visiting her required careful planning, as any connection between them could alert Langston's remaining associates. Using aliases and covert communication channels, Elena arranged a meeting between Marcus and Maria in the prison visiting room. When Marcus entered, he immediately noticed the weariness etched into Maria's face, her eyes hollow from years of despair. Yet, there was also a spark of defiance, a refusal to let her spirit be crushed. Marcus introduced himself cautiously, explaining his own experience and offering to help prove her innocence. At first, Maria hesitated, wary of trusting someone she didn't know. But as Marcus shared details only someone familiar with her case would understand, her skepticism gave way to hope. "Do you really think you can help me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I won't stop until we find the truth," he promised. With Maria's cooperation, the team dove deeper into her case, uncovering shocking parallels with Marcus's. Witnesses who had testified against her later admitted to being pressured by corrupt detectives. Key forensic evidence had mysteriously disappeared, leaving prosecutors reliant on circumstantial claims. Most damning of all, internal memos revealed that Maria's arrest had been orchestrated to divert attention from a high-profile drug bust gone wrong. Armed with this information, Elena drafted a petition for retrial, submitting it to the appellate court. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly to gather additional support, rallying advocates and activists who specialized in overturning wrongful convictions. While progress was slow, small victories kept them motivated. A judge agreed to review Maria's case, citing new evidence presented by Elena's team. Public interest grew as news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the flaws plaguing the justice system. For Marcus, seeing Maria's hope reinforced his belief that change was possible, even if it came one case at a time. Still, the broader battle loomed large. Every success brought reminders of how deeply entrenched corruption had become, requiring sustained effort to dismantle entirely. As weeks turned into months, Marcus found himself grappling with another challenge: reconciling his past with his present. The skills he had honed as a Delta Force commander, the same ones that had saved him in prison, now served a different purpose. Where once he had fought battles abroad, he now waged war against injustice at home. It was a role he hadn't anticipated, yet one he embraced wholeheartedly. Ryan often teased him about becoming a soldier for justice, but Marcus took it seriously. He knew the transition wouldn't be easy, especially given the toll it had taken on his mental and emotional well-being. Nightmares plagued him, vivid replays of combat missions and prison fights blending together in chaotic loops. Yet each morning, he rose determined to push forward, driven by the knowledge that his actions mattered. To cope, Marcus leaned on Elena and Ryan, finding solace in their unwavering support. They became more than collaborators. They were family, bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. Elena, ever the optimist, encouraged Marcus to channel his experiences into advocacy. "Work. You've seen the worst of humanity," she told him one evening, "but you've also shown what's possible when people stand up for what's right. That's powerful." Inspired by her words, Marcus began speaking publicly about his journey, using platforms provided by organizations fighting for criminal justice reform. His speeches resonated deeply, drawing attention not only to his personal story, but also to the systemic issues affecting marginalized communities. One such event marked a turning point for Marcus. Standing before a packed auditorium, he recounted his struggles and triumphs, his voice steady despite the weight of his emotions. "I'm not special," he said, addressing the crowd. "I'm just a man who refused to give up. If my story inspires even one person to demand better, from our leaders, from our courts, from ourselves, then every hardship will have been worth it." The audience erupted in applause, moved by his sincerity and conviction. Among them was a young journalist named Leah, whose brother had recently been sentenced under questionable circumstances. After the talk, she approached Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing us that we don't have to accept this broken system." That moment solidified Marcus's decision to dedicate his life to reform. With Elena's encouragement, he founded a non-profit organization aimed at supporting wrongfully convicted individuals and advocating for transparency in law enforcement. Named Path to Justice, the initiative combined legal assistance, investigative journalism, and grassroots activism to tackle systemic issues head-on. Ryan joined the board, leveraging his military connections to secure funding and resources. Together, they built a network of lawyers, researchers, and volunteers committed to making lasting change. Despite the challenges ahead, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Each day brought opportunities to fight for those without a voice, to hold power accountable, and to inspire others to join the cause. He knew the road would be long and fraught with obstacles, but he welcomed it. After all, he had faced far worse and emerged stronger. As he looked toward the future, Marcus realized that true freedom wasn't merely walking away from prison walls. It was the ability to choose how to live, to turn pain into action, and to leave the world better than he found it. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that such a future was within reach. Months passed, and Marcus Kane's transformation from a wrongfully convicted man to a champion of justice became a beacon of hope for many. Path to Justice, the non-profit he founded with Elena and Ryan, gained momentum faster than anyone anticipated. The organization's mission, to expose corruption, overturn wrongful convictions, and reform the criminal justice system, resonated deeply with communities across the country. Stories poured in from individuals desperate for help, families torn apart by unjust sentences, victims of police misconduct seeking accountability, and advocates fighting against systemic racism within the courts. Each case was unique, but they all shared a common thread, a cry for fairness in a world that often seemed indifferent. Marcus threw himself into the work, pouring his energy into reviewing cases, mentoring volunteers, and speaking at events nationwide. He traveled tirelessly, visiting prisons to meet inmates who believed their voices had been silenced forever. One such visit took him to Greenfield Correctional Facility, where he met James Carter, a middle-aged man serving life without parole for a crime he swore he didn't commit. James's story mirrored Marcus's in many ways. Falsified evidence, coerced confessions, and a lack of proper legal representation during trial. Sitting across from James in the visiting room, Marcus felt a pang of familiarity. "I know what you're going through," Marcus said gently. "But I also know it's not over until we've exhausted every option." With Elena leading the investigative team and Ryan coordinating logistics, Marcus spearheaded efforts to re-examine James's case. They uncovered startling discrepancies in the prosecution's timeline and identified witnesses who had been intimidated into silence. Through painstaking research and relentless advocacy, They managed to secure a retrial. When James walked out of prison months later, his innocence finally proven, he embraced Marcus, tears streaming down his face. "You saved my life," James whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Marcus shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "We did this together. You never gave up, and neither did we. Each victory brought renewed determination. But Marcus understood that individual cases were only part of the solution. To create lasting change, the system itself needed to be dismantled and rebuilt. With Elena's guidance, Marcus began collaborating with lawmakers, academics, and grassroots activists to draft comprehensive reforms. These included measures like mandatory body cameras for law enforcement officers, independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct, and increased funding for public defenders. While progress was slow, Marcus remained undeterred. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he told Elena during one late-night strategy session. "But if we keep pushing, even small steps can lead to big results." As Path to Justice grew, so did its reach. Media coverage amplified the organization's message, drawing attention to injustices that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Journalists like Leah, the young reporter who had approached Marcus after his speech, dedicated entire series to exposing flaws in the justice system. Their work complemented Marcus's efforts, creating a ripple effect that inspired others to take action. High-profile figures, from celebrities to politicians, began endorsing the cause, lending their platforms to amplify the call for reform. For Marcus, seeing widespread support was both gratifying and humbling. He knew the movement wasn't about him. It was about giving power back to those who had been stripped of it. Despite the successes, challenges persisted. Resistance from entrenched interests was fierce. Some prosecutors fought tooth and nail to block appeals, while others attempted to discredit Marcus and his team. Anonymous threats arrived regularly, warning them to abandon their crusade. Yet, Marcus refused to be intimidated. His military training had taught him resilience, and his experiences in prison had hardened his resolve. "They're scared because they know we're right," he told Ryan during a tense meeting. "If they weren't guilty, they wouldn't fight so hard to shut us down." The most significant test came when Victor Langston's legal team launched a desperate bid to overturn his conviction. Claiming new evidence exonerated him, they sought to discredit the testimony of key witnesses and undermine the credibility of Marcus's investigation. The media circus surrounding the appeal reignited public interest in the scandal, forcing Marcus and his team to defend their findings against intense scrutiny. Elena worked around the clock to ensure every piece of evidence held up under examination, while Ryan mobilized his network to counter misinformation campaigns aimed at discrediting Path to Justice. When the court ultimately upheld Langston's conviction, it was a monumental win, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had suffered under Langston's corrupt regime. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, finding strength in the people around him. Elena became more than a collaborator. She was a confidant and friend who understood the weight of the battles he fought. Ryan, ever the steadfast ally, provided wisdom and humor when Marcus needed it most. Even former inmates like Jamal and Derek stayed connected, volunteering their time to support the organization's initiatives. Together, they formed a family united by purpose, proving that real change required collective effort. As years went by, Marcus's legacy expanded beyond individual victories or policy changes. He became a symbol of redemption and resilience, showing the world that even in the darkest moments, courage could prevail. Schools invited him to speak to students about integrity and perseverance, while universities offered honorary degrees recognizing his contributions to social justice. Though Marcus accepted these accolades graciously, he never lost sight of his roots. Every award ceremony ended with a reminder, "This isn't about me. It's about everyone still fighting for freedom and fairness." In quieter moments, Marcus reflected on how far he had come. From the desolate cells of Red Rock Penitentiary to the forefront of a national movement, his journey had been anything but ordinary. But what struck him most was how much he had grown, not just as an advocate but as a person. Prison had stripped him of everything except his identity, yet it had also forced him to confront truths he had long avoided. He realized now that his past as a Delta Force commander wasn't something to bury. It was a foundation upon which he could build a better future. The skills he once used to protect nations were now tools for protecting humanity itself. One evening, standing on the balcony of his modest home, Marcus watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the city below. Behind him, Elena joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Marcus smiled, taking a sip of his drink. "How far we've come," he replied, "and how much farther we have to go." Elena nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's a big fight," she admitted, "but I think we're ready." Marcus turned to face her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "We have to be," he said simply, "because there are still too many people counting on us." In that moment, he felt a profound sense of peace, not because the battle was over, but because he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The scars of his past would always remain, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of the strength he carried within and the promise of a brighter tomorrow for those willing to fight for it. And so, Marcus Kane continued his journey, driven by the belief that justice wasn't just an ideal, it was a responsibility. With Elena, Ryan, and countless others by his side, he forged ahead, determined to leave behind a legacy of hope, resilience, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. For Marcus, the fight wasn't merely about fixing a broken system. It was about proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could rise above. And that, he decided, was worth every sacrifice.